Yeah, that's a very deep topic, right? Because kind of and entering China is a big topic. What I would say is that lots of people are looking at it, and I would say you can't dabble in China. You're either all in or you're all out. It's just different from so many perspectives, right? And so I think the first decision is, am I going to go all out into China? Because from channel strategy to consumer behavior to market segmentation to marketing tools, it's all different. It's a completely different landscape. So, that means that a lot of the work that maybe startups outside of China need to work on are not leverageable in China. And so I think kind of that's one thing. It really needs to be an all-out proposition. A lot of people think about partnerships, and going into China, I would say partnerships are important. But I think a lot of startups, even big companies, often kind of run into kind of a misconception or maybe over expectation that if I find the right partner, then I'm set. And I would tell you absolutely not. So having a partner is critical, but at the end of the day, you'll be going to be running this yourself, right? So you can talk a little bit about what's involved, but it's a whole different proposition. I'll break it down. Let's look at the media landscape. Okay, so if you're a startup, you might want to use social media. You might want to build social media into your product. You might want to use social media and digital to basically do promotions, right? And to let other people and consumers know about your product. But, for those who understand China, China has a big firewall. So lots of commonly used digital media, Facebook, Twitter, all these, it's a different set of players in China. Right, the big players are BAT, is what they call it in China. Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, right? And so it's a very, very different media landscape, right? And so lots of the partnerships for content, for channel, needs to be different. And so you have to kind of start from scratch. And more, these partners are very big. They're just as powerful as a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon outside, right? And if you look at the numbers, I would tell you, right? If you look at Tencent and the WeChat platform, what was it? The number of users on that is north of 700 million, right? So I think kind of you enter into China, you can't ignore these platforms and partnerships. At the same time, they're very, very big, right? So the scale is very big. I have a lot of expertise in terms of consumer electronics products, and there again, the consumer behavior I think is very different than you might expect elsewhere. If you look at it, and I've been in China for 14 years, okay? So when you look at this period of time, you kind of have consumer behavior evolve within those 10 years that took generations before, right? And what does that mean? Kind of for when I first went to China, right? And I was with Nokia, right? And you would go sell mobile phones, right? And so back then, mobile phones was a big category. We would have a mobile phone that's not selling. And so what would you do? You might discount, you might do something else. Guess what we do for certain models? We raise the price. We raise the price to the top. And then guess what? Your volumes increase too. And that has not happened anywhere else. Because normally when you do a price increase, you have to do this elasticity analysis, right? Okay, so if I raise the price, volumes will go down a little bit, but net I increase my revenues. Back then, in those days, that did not apply. You can both raise your price and raise your volumes, and you don't see elsewhere. And the reason is very simple. These are consumers that are buying stuff for the first time. They don't understand how to pick products. They know the brand, and so actually then price itself communicates a lot. So you have people come in, and they say, what's your most expensive mobile phone? Give me 5. Okay, all right, that's okay. That behavior no longer exists. Then then there's a period of time where people buy the big brands, right? I'm going to buy Gucci. I'm going to buy my first car, my first house. So you have a generation of consumers who are buying stuff and trying stuff for the first time. And now it's brands. So they'll buy these high-end brands. Okay. Now you have people doing what? They stop buying brands. They're not buying products. They're buying experiences. And so, for example, you'll notice, on social media, people are not buying stuff anymore. They used to kind of on their WeChat. Oh, I bought a Gucci. I bought a whatever. Here's my first car. Now you'll notice a lot of people, no, I am in Europe. I'm in France. I'm at a winery. I'm in Antarctica, right? So they're buying experiences. So you see within 10 years, In the Western world, other places, this is kind of generations of change, different behavior. You have that crunched into 10 years. And so this has lots of implication for how do you build your brand in a place like China. It has lots of implications for how do you segment your product. Because of what I just said, the market in terms of consumer behavior is hyper fragmented. Okay, and so in China, there's a saying that, okay, you need to adapt your message and your product for different generations of people. It's not even generations. They say, okay, 80后, 90后. Those born after 1980s, those born after 1990s, completely different. They expect different things. They buy things differently. And so I think, in summary, the whole consumer behavior is very different than you might expect. And the reason is very simple. This generation of people is the first consumer class in China. And it continues to change very, very quickly. So I think, partnerships is different. The media landscape is different. Consumer behavior is different. Channel is different, right? So a lot of people, again, trying to sell products in China, let's say online, e-commerce, okay? And this is very interesting. E-commerce in China, I would say, drives a higher percentage of sales than anywhere else. So consumers in China are very accustomed to using e-commerce to buy all sorts of products. And I had this similar experience when I was with my startup Rocket, right? Because we were looking at both the Chinese and the U.S. markets. Okay, and this is an interesting story. In China, there are a lot of, of course, China is a very large market, but with e-commerce, you're able to use e-commerce platform only to sell products to get to a certain level. If you look at the United States, for example, I think there is e-commerce there as well for certain products, but in general, consumer behavior is still very much brick and mortar. And I'll give you an example. There's a company called Pebble, of course, which is a bit under trouble now, but Pebble is one of the pioneers of the wearables market, right? The way they started is online. They started, I believe it was Kickstarter, right? So they were on Kickstarter. So I thought, given how they started, most of their sales would be completed online. It's actually false, right? So I was talking with them, and this is about a year ago, and they said to me, so I tried to ask them, so what's your split in terms of your online virtual versus your brick and mortar channel? They never gave me the number, but what they did say, predominantly brick and mortar, even for a brand like Pebble. And so this is a very clear difference, okay? And so I think the e-commerce, as it relates to consumers in China, is taking more percentage of sales. At the same time, the channel mix is also quite different, meaning that I see a lot of startups doing both online and offline type of mixes, right? But then again, the partners that you would choose in China all different, right? In China, it would be Alibaba, it would be Jingdong, right? Then there's some verticals you would try, right? These are not big names outside of China. In terms of your channel partners, for example, for consumer electronics products, it would be Suning, Guomei, right? These types of stores, right? So all again, different names. The channel structure, I think, as well, in terms of the margins, are quite different, right? So I think kind of net, what you can see here is kind of China is a big topic, and to do properly, you can't rely on a partner to do it for you. You need to kind of roll up your sleeves and understand the market, because it also moves very quickly. I have almost not seen Taiwanese startups entering into China. I have seen many local startups headed by Taiwanese, right? Headed by Taiwanese. There are lots of Taiwanese in China, right? But frankly, I don't see a lot of Taiwanese startups actually, kind of working here, then going into China and being successful. In the earlier days when I was working with some content providers at Nokia, I worked with companies like KKBox, I think, which is still in Taiwan. And I think they had a presence in China for a while. But I think a lot of those, given the hyper competition in China, I think they've kind of, they haven't really made it to the top three in their categories, right? So for example, KKBox, I don't believe is still in China, or they might be there in a very small footprint. Yeah. It's a hard market. It's different. I think China is a particularly tricky thing for Taiwanese startups. And I think part of that is also a little bit of a mentality, right? I mean, I grew up in Taiwan too, right? And I'm going to betray my age. I remember when I was growing up here, you go to the movie theater, they'll sing the Taiwan national anthem. You would stand, right? Then they would say, in Chinese, 检举匪谍,人人有责. To report on communist spies is everybody's responsibility. That's how I grew up here, okay? And given kind of also the political situation between China and Taiwan, I think lots of Taiwanese starts to kind of think twice before they go in, right? There are lots of stories about Taiwanese companies who kind of get cheated somehow in China. But I think kind of I think China, because of its structure, lots of markets, Western markets in particular, I mean, kind of your document. So if you sign a contract, I mean, you can bet on it, right? In China, it's a piece of paper, really. It's a piece of paper. And so that kind of changes what needs to happen. And this is not just for Taiwanese companies, it's for any companies, right? Even big companies, right? So when I'm with Samsung before, Nokia, we have big legal departments, but I always carefully review the contract. And actually, very clearly that if things don't work out, the contract won't help you. And so the bottom line is you also need to manage the alignment of interests, right, in China. So what I'm trying to say is that because of that and that framework, it just takes a different and more detailed mode of operations, right, than just signing a contract or picking a partner. But on the other hand, because of Taiwan's unique positioning, actually, there were some more beneficial policies for Taiwanese companies versus, let's say, a Western company, right? And I'm used to working with, let's say a U.S. multinational, European multinational, even a Korean multinational in China. There's much more restrictions than for a Taiwanese or Hong Kong company. So it's definitely a market, I think, that startups in Taiwan should consider, right? It's a very tricky market, but it's quickly becoming a market not just of scale, but for companies that are doing technology, lots of innovation. I'll give you another example. When I was with Nokia many years back, and Nokia was number one, number two in China, we had lots of competitors, local Chinese competitors, and they come in low cost, and we always felt none of the local Chinese will ever make it big or globally because a mobile phone has lots of technology. It's a hard product. It's a very tech-heavy product. And so we never felt that, any big Chinese will really make it global, right? And if you look at today, and you look at the global top 10 phone manufacturers, 5 are Chinese, yeah? And you look at some of their technology, the innovation, it's come up very, very quickly. So not only is China a hub, a consumer market in and of itself, it's also now becoming a place of innovation. You look at some of the products that they do. For example, social media. Do you use WeChat? For those who use WeChat, I would say it's a better product than Facebook, Twitter, U.S. companies combined. It really is. And so I think China is also now becoming a hub of innovation. An area where I work a lot is the area of artificial intelligence. Yes. And one of the experiences I found is that the China market is a very good environment for startups and innovation. Of course, the government encourages it, but then there are other factors as well. You have a market of scale, right? So if you do something big, it could really ramp quickly. You have a consumer base. Actually, Chinese consumers are willing to try new things, right? Because they're trying new things anyway, so they're willing to try new things. So it's a very, very suitable market for innovation. And more, you see that their technology expertise is growing by leaps and bounds. So, so it used to be a factory. It used to be, a big market. Now it's generating some very interesting innovations. Yeah, so it's a market that encourages startups to really look closely at. The government supports as it relates to tax subsidies, right? I mean, governments now also have some small investment funds, but I would say those are mainly for local companies, okay? But in terms of some of the restrictions, or for example, there's some areas that are restricted for foreign companies. There are some other policies. Actually, they tend to be slightly more favorable to Taiwanese companies as they are for other, let's say, multinationals or other foreign companies. Again, the regulatory landscape in China changes very quickly, right? And so, right, depends a bit on kind of what's happening kind of at the macro level. But, at least it's not, it's a common playing field, if you will, for all foreign companies in China. Yeah, but anytime you do business in China, you need to think a bit about government and government regulations. And I think that's just very much built in, right, to the way you operate. And I think that mentality is quite different than elsewhere. I would think in Taiwan, if you're doing a startup, you're not spending a lot of your time thinking about what's the government thinking about it, right? Unless you're trying to get some subsidies and other things, right? Same thing in the U.S. when I worked there and other places. But China's very different because the government is involved in many, many things, right? So I remember way back when I was still based in Silicon Valley, I would fly in and we were doing business in China. And we were working with the big operators, China Mobile, China Unicom, right? China Telecom. And we'll have a meeting with them. And they'll say, yeah, you go back and you tell your government XYZ. And we thought, we don't really have that tight of communications with our government. But I think, in anything that you do in China, like regulation, governmental support is always a factor that you at least need to think about. It's a bit better for tech, but it's front and center, and one of the criteria you need to consider when operating in China. Well, there are two challenges for startups, right? One challenge is a global challenge. It's not just for Taiwan startups. Any startup doing hardware faces the challenge of getting it manufactured. And because the factories are used to doing volume production, it's very, very hard for them to take on the volumes that a startup can offer. This is the same for my company, Rocket, as well. It's very, very difficult, even if you have the money. Okay, so that's a global challenge, just getting a factory to accept your order. The other piece, though, I think, for Taiwanese startups, I think there's a slight advantage because lots of the manufacturers, the contract manufacturers in China who are building the products are Taiwanese. The top 5 are Taiwanese. So my factories in China, I have 2 large factories. These contract manufacturers are both Taiwanese owned. So the expertise is here. And so I think kind of and I think kind of, and I'm living in Taiwan now, and there's always a question, kind of what's the special opportunities for Taiwan in today's global tech environment? And I would say this trend and growth of IoT is an advantage for Taiwanese willing to capture it. And the opportunity is very simple. With all these IoT companies, there's a very big demand to find a factory to build your product, a turnkey solution, if you will. Right now, I can tell you, none exist. Okay. At the same time, Taiwan has a lot of expertise in contract manufacturing. Big companies, existing big companies, find it very hard to service the needs of IoT startups. Very hard. They're just not set up to do it. And I have direct experience going through that process, right? And I had my own hardware engineers, right? Still, it was hard, okay? And it remains a challenge. So there is a very big opportunity for a Taiwan-based company to become the factory for IoT startups. And this demand is global. I have seen IoT startups in Silicon Valley fly to China to find factories because there's no turnkey solution. Right? So I think that's a very interesting opportunity. And right now, and I've been in Taiwan a very short period of time, I haven't seen anybody actually targeting that opportunity. I mean, the perspective is completely different, right? I mean, so, kind of being a founder, an executive in running your own company versus being an investor. Yeah, I think the perspective is completely different. The way that you would, the issues that you think about, the areas that you focus on are quite different between these two. When you're running a company, a lot of the issues you're thinking about are, how do I do the partnerships? How do I develop my product? How do I market it? I mean, lots of these very operational issues. From a from an investor perspective, you'll ask about it, and this will certainly be part of the due diligence, right? But I think what you're more focused on as an investor is, okay, the team. This team here, are they going to be able to stick with it when things get tough? When the market changes on them? Are they going to be able to shift? Because you're almost guaranteed that the business plan you see today will be different tomorrow. Guarantee you, and they know that too. So they're looking at the team, the composition of the team, not just a skill set, but also how would you characterize it? Your mental stamina, your emotional stamina, right? Can you stick with it, right? So you're looking at that. You're looking for some track record, right? Are these people have a track record of exiting and building companies that bring value to their investors? You're also looking at a more macro scale, right? Investors often invest in certain sectors, and they go with it. A lot of people looking from the outside, venture investing, you think, well, venture investing is about taking risks. So venture capitalists should be very, very good at looking at risks and taking risks. But I tell you, the opposite is true. Venture capitalists often have a very much herd mentality. Because there's all this stuff out there, right? And so they're looking for, and this is why you see certain companies with very high valuations, because everybody's going after the hot deal. Because even if the hot deal fails, you're not going to get blamed for it because everybody else went for it. So actually, venture is a bit of a herd mentality, which is why sectors are important. These sectors go up and down, right? When we were doing Rocket early on, right, we're very much in the artificial intelligence space. Back then, it was starting to get hot in China, but not elsewhere, right? But now I think AI as a topic, as a domain, is very high. And so I think for startups looking for investments, you kind of need to position yourself in the right domain. And sometimes this is not just about what you're actually doing, but also about packaging. Right? So you're doing big data, and some people, right, big data is now AI, right? And so, from that perspective, right, what's the macro level trends, and are you part of that trend, right? Because from an investor perspective, looking for the big win. This is a very interesting period of time, right, to be in technology. And you might notice that now there are a lot more new product categories coming into the market, and I'm talking specifically about consumer electronics, right? A couple of years ago, if you look at the landscape, it's pretty standard. You have phones and tablets and computers, and right. Now what do you have? You have wearables, you have drones, you have robots, you have smart speakers, you have voice, you have a whole host of different things. You have self-driving cars. I tell you, these are the things that, when I was growing up, this is like fantasy. You're reading a book and, oh yeah, in the future, your car will drive you. And I remember reading it. It's just never going to happen. I tell you, it's happening right now. And I talked to some car manufacturers, it's happening right now. In our lifetimes, we're going to be in self-driving cars. I guarantee you that, right? So I think the broad trend is that there's a lot of new product categories coming to market. I think one of the areas that I think is really interesting is within IoT, home. The use of artificial intelligence in the home, right? Products like the Amazon Echo, right? Growing. What came out 2 years ago? 2 years ago? And now, depending on the reports that you look at, 5 to 8 million units sold in the US alone. It's starting to build some scale. So I think very, very quickly, we're going to see a revolution in the home in terms of the types of products and capabilities that you can now do inside your home. One of those being voice, in terms of a new interface. So I think, and I think the time frame will be fairly quick. I think in 5 years, you'll see a very different landscape in products than we are seeing today. Well, just taking on what I just said, this is a very interesting time to be alive. There's a lot of areas that you can tap into, right? You can choose all sorts of different areas. Even for building IoT products, lots of modules are becoming available. There's a lot of open source stuff, right? Google's opening up their AI. Their TensorFlow is open if you want to tap into that. There's a lot of open source stuff. And so there's a lot of opportunity that's available. So I think for the entrepreneur, for the startup, for the company that's paying attention, going out there looking for these resources, I think in many, many ways, the barrier to entry has lowered. At the same time, the world has become a more complicated place, right? How do you go to market? It's a lot of competition, right? And having worked in China, it's hyper competition. You do something and guess what? A couple hundred other companies doing the exact same thing. And so then how do you compete in this environment, right? And so I think kind of net, I'm very optimistic. I mean, there's all this innovation happening right now, right? Even things that even a couple years ago, people thought were impossible are now happening around us, right? Even things like voice, right? Siri's been around for a long time. Yeah, it's not really working out. Whoever thought there's now a new product category called smart speakers? Alexa's coming out, right? And it's actually powering lots of IoT products. So if you're building an IoT product today with voice, you don't have to develop your own. You can use Alexa. You can use lots of third-party services and platforms that are out there today.